don't enthusiastically, don't support at all, to be honest with you, is this election of the mayor. I would go down all the possible streets, Algoma, High Street, Main, Jackson. I got so frustrated the way the stoplights were never in sync. Everyone turned red every time you pulled up to it. Lots of family discussions on, who's going to put their name on the note at the bank.
Today, if you guys are just joining us for the first time, I do see some familiar faces, but we've been running this series called the Local Legends Series. We find some notable Oshkosh, Fox Valley business leaders, bring them into the Venture Project here, which is our incubator and co-working space, and we get a chance to chat with them for 45 to 60 minutes and learn kind of some of the insights they've had over the course of their career. Today, we are very fortunate to have Mr. Bill Castle, who is a very prominent Oshkosh figure, the former CEO of CastlePierce, a mayor of Oshkosh, council member, sat on many different boards from the Chamber of Commerce and many other volunteer boards as well. And I'm really excited to have you here, so thank you so much for offering your time today.
Thanks, AJ. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Let's welcome him today. Well, I'd like to just hear a little bit about you. If people aren't familiar, people might be watching this who don't really know Bill Castle. Where did it kind of start with you from your childhood? Where'd you grow up? What were you like as a kid?
That's a long time ago, but let me see if I can resurrect some of those thoughts and memories. I was actually born in Philadelphia. My father was stationed there during the war, but he came back after the war to take over CastlePierce. And I grew up on Algoma Boulevard, right where Scott Hall is today. Our family had a home there from, after the war until they tore it down for Scott Hall in the early 60s. It was a great area. I mean, we had Lincoln School across the street.
There we go. We'll just keep going.
We had Lincoln School across the street. And in those days, as most of us of that generation, our parents just gave us a bike and said, be careful, go do what you want.
No screens back then.
And, it was a lot different growing up. And we went down to the river and do some fishing or play ball over at Lincoln, and just a great area to grow up. So that's where my youth was. It was on Algoma Boulevard, just west of Wisconsin Avenue. So
tell me a little bit about, I know that CastlePierce has a really rich history in Oshkosh, multiple generations in your family. What's kind of your reflection of its history? You mentioned earlier, you said there's a chief historian officer at the company, but I mean, what is your kind of recollection of where it started? Tell us the CastlePierce story.
Well, for the Castle family, my great-grandfather came to town as a freight agent for the railroad. I don't know if it was called the Chicago Northwestern back in those days, but it terminated right there at the river, or where the Pioneer was, before they built the bridge. He was a freight agent, like I said. His second son, William, got a job with the Northwestern newspaper as a printer's devil and finished his high school, and that's all he had for an education was a high school education. But caught on to typesetting and was fairly good at the English language, and became foreman of that shop, of the typesetting area. Well, then the publishers decided they didn't want to be in a job shop. They had a newspaper and a job shop. So my great-grandfather bought the customer list, some of the equipment, started CastlePierce in what's now the basement of the Algoma building over on Algoma. Then it moved to the building that's now the lobby of the Grand Opera House. Then in the mid-20s, 1920s, they built the building that's across the street. We always referred to it as 25 High Street. That was the old address. And in 1963, my father built the building on a Riff Road, which was really my brother's and myself's career was out there. I did do some summer jobs on High Street, but one memory I'll always have was on High Street. My father got myself and another fellow to wash walls in the building during our summer vacation. And there was a great community youth deal called the Oshkosh Community Players, Youth Players. And every summer they'd put on a play. Well, one summer, the summer I was doing the walls, I could go back in the old names, but real quick, they did Guys and Dolls, and a friend of ours got an Oshkosh police uniform to be the policeman in Guys and Dolls. So during our break for washing walls, we stood out on the front of the building like this with this fellow with the Oshkosh police uniform with some kind of a toy gun. You should have seen the people driving around the block to see what's going on here on High Street. And it was just fun being down there. There was lots of retail down in that area of town, so you could run over to Kresge's and get popcorn or hot dogs, and just a neat area. But there was no room for expansion for CastlePierce, so that's why they built out where they did. At the time, my father sort of thought that might be a pretty good industrial site because railroads was going by there, but that, of course, is abandoned today. And from there, it's grown into quite a few additional buildings out there. Plus now my son, who is the fifth generation of running the company, bought what I could call the old Radford company over on Stillman. A lot of people think of Radford down on Wisconsin Avenue, but they moved out to Stillman Street when the city and the state wanted to expand Highway 44 as it came across the bridge there. So we have two locations in Oshkosh today.
Yeah. So you mentioned as a kid, you were kind of playful. You ran around the yard, a lot different than I imagine kids now. What? Tell me about like your early adult years. As you matured into kind of a business leader, what that process looked like.
Well, I went away to college after high school, of course, and then got military service, and both those experiences were great in far as being low man on the totem pole and working your way up in both a college atmosphere and definitely in the military atmosphere.
And you were in the Navy, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
I was in the Navy. I got lucky in one respect. I was stationed out in Newport, Rhode Island on a repair ship, and I was actually running a printing department on the repair ship. So it's amazing they put somebody that had a knowledge in that business. You'd think they'd put me in the galley or someplace where I didn't know anything about cooking or what have you. But that gave me some experience in being in charge of something, having to report to somebody higher up. And so when I got out of the Navy, we came back. My father was still active in the business. My brother was still in the Navy. He's continued for another year and a half or 2 years before he came back. But then we had a nice relationship in that Mike, those of you who knew Mike, he was a great relationship builder and loved sales. And I'd do some of that, but I was more into the manufacturing side of the business. So I think just family background and different life experiences sort of gave me my training that helped me through my business career.
Did you have some early mentors when you were kind of that you reflect back on that were impactful to you as a leader?
Not directly. I mean, one of the people I was thinking about before I came here, and last day or two, was thinking about this. Vince Lombardi showed up in this area when I was like 16, 17 years old. And there's no question, I think he was an unbelievable leader of, it was a football team, obviously, but just listening to him, and I had a chance to meet him twice, just to say hello to him, but it was just really something to see a team that was always in the cellar, all of a sudden turn around and become a world champion, putting Green Bay on the map and everything. So, I read books he put out and just listened to him, and I just think maybe he could be somebody I could look up to back in those days when I was 16, 17 years old.
Yeah. What are the characteristics of Vince Lombardi that you think are either lost today or that ought to be emphasized today?
Well, the biggest one to me is discipline. I mean, he, demanded discipline on his team, and, I love that saying. He said, we'll never be excellent. We'll always be trying to achieve excellence.
Right.
And that's, what your life is, just trying to always achieve something better.
Do you think that's hard to find today? Do you think that the lack of discipline in the business world or in the corporate world or in entrepreneurship is something that we need?
Well, it certainly wouldn't hurt. I mean, I'm a little removed from so much of the new generation. When I was still active, if you had some issue with somebody and they were in the building, you'd see them face to face. If they weren't, you maybe pick up the phone and you could talk it out. You know, nowadays, I don't think anybody uses the phone anymore. It's all emails and primarily emails because, you know, text messaging is another form of messaging. But, yeah, I think there is probably some, I'm not sure just what word I want to use, but certainly could be more direct personal relationship.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you see that like in kind of the sales side of things, how that's changed, like that there is an art to sales with this direct relationship building? And you mentioned your late brother, Mike, who was fantastic at that. What are some of those characteristics that you think were very impactful at building a business, those people skills that are necessary?
Well, number one, look somebody in the eye and say, yeah, I understand what you're saying, and, you know, listen, and, you know, just really show that you care about somebody. And that to me, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, like caring about people, looking at them, and treating them like humans. I had some questions just about, you know, as you kind of grew into this role in your company, what were some of those big challenges you faced early on? What were some of those pivotal moments that you had to overcome as a leader?
Well, you know, in a family-held business, and I've found this with my son too, as I was starting to exit, my father still had the controlling stock in the business. And when you're in your 60s, pushing mid-60s, let's say, you look at life a lot differently than somebody that's in their 30s as far as spending money. You know, we realized, both my brother and myself, that technology was changing, and we always wanted to try to be on the cutting edge for technology. And I think CastlePierce was and still is on the cutting edge of their type of printing. There's other printers that do other things good. We find our niche. But going back to the challenge was, since my father had the stock and my brother and I wanted to grow the business, and we worked it out, but boy, it was lots of family discussions on, you know, who's going to put their name on the note at the bank. And finally, Mike and I said, we'll do it.
Do you think, like, you mentioned something I think that comes up a lot in our space with this propensity to innovate. You want to be different. You want to keep pushing, you know, the envelope, but you also have to reflect on things that work and are working and continue to work. And this tension exists between how much reinventing of the wheel do we want to do versus how much focusing on our core competencies do we want to pay attention to. And that sounds like a little bit of some things you probably experienced early on in your career. How would you go about solving that problem as a leader, the right amount of balance, if you will?
Well, you certainly have to pay attention to what's going out there in the world around you related to our business concerns. And, you know, so much of it is you just sometimes get lucky. I mean, one of the things that when I got back in business, we had a nice business with the millwork industry, with Morgan Company being here in Oshkosh, Radford, and we had relationships with other millwork distributors around the country. And millwork was always a little slow between January and early to late March because construction wasn't going on. So they'd redo all their catalogs. That was a busy time. We also then got involved in annual report printing. Well, most firms, their fiscal year ended December 31st. The annual reports would come out March, April. So our business was really pretty darn strong from mid-December till mid-May. But then that sort of slacked off. We had other nice jobs, but it wasn't what we had built the company to be. And so at the time we thought, well, let's see what we can find to fill in that summer valley. And that's how we sort of stumbled, I guess that's the word, into packaging printing. We found a few firms that needed some labels or things like that. And as that started to grow, that's when we realized, well, this is a nice niche. And we pursued a little bit more, not knowing that down the line, when the internet was coming. And our type of catalog commercial printing was for the Speed Queens, the Mercury Marines, the Aaron's Company, nice firms around here that sold a specific product that you looked at their book at a dealer or showroom. Well, all of a sudden, when the internet shows up, I'm going to go online and see what this company compares to that company. And all of a sudden, the catalog business really started to disappear. The runs of 50 or 80,000 were, 20 or 25,000 runs. So we just, we're getting the volume that we wanted. Meanwhile, we had put our toe into the water on packaging, and we started to grow that business. And, you got to be looking out beyond the horizon a little bit, but you got to get lucky too,
Yeah. One of the things that I think is really awesome about your company is the entrepreneurial spirit you've brought to it. Looking at entrepreneurs today and what we need and what's out there, what kind of advice would you give someone that's looking to start a business or it might be interested in filling a need? How would you advise them today?
Pay attention to what your core desire is. I mean, if you're building wiggets or who knows what, you got to make sure you got a demand for it, and then make sure you can make the best one you can. I mean, I'm trying to play golf right now. I'm trying to, still play as good as I can.
Yeah. But listening to the market sounds is this key piece of it, and understanding the market value and where you can fill that role. Do you think there's anything to being entrepreneurial in a larger company? Is there benefit to bringing those types of employees in, or what's the right balance between executors and then dreamers and thinkers and strategists?
Well, what was that old saying? You used to, make sure you got a good balance of farmers and hunters. You want the hunters that are going out there looking for the new possibilities.
I've never heard that before.
You want the farmers to make sure the fields are plowed correctly and everything's done right inside. So it's all, to me, just paying attention and keeping everything in perspective.
So when you're saying paying attention, are you talking about inward facing, understanding your people, understanding your organization? What do you mean by paying attention?
I think you summed up pretty closely. You got to make sure you have a relationship with your employees, first of all, so that, they can perform for your customers when they need to, and just keep paying attention.
Yeah, and the kind of plan, like a team, like you're talking about Lombardi, is like where on the team do we want to fill these different roles? Where are the strengths we have? Where are the weaknesses? And how do we understand where we're going so we can continue to fill these types of roles when we're short staffed or things like that. Mm-hmm. I wanted to shift gears a little bit because you've been such a pivotal member in our community in Oshkosh. Kind of reflecting on your career as the mayor, as a councilman, as all these different positions in community boards. What do you think Oshkosh needs today? What do you think we're missing? Where do you think people and leaders in the community could come together and start to work on these types of issues?
That's a loaded question.
We've got to kill the time with something.
Wow. Well, I think if you're going to get involved in whether it's a school board, the city council, or any thing that's public related, you got to make sure that you have a passion for it. I mean, I got involved into the city in a way because I lived for a number of years on Washington Avenue, worked out west of the city. I would go down all the possible streets, Algoma, High Street, Main, Jackson. I got so frustrated the way the stoplights were never in sync. Every one turned red every time you pulled up to it. And somewhere I had met Bill Free, the former city manager, and I knew him well enough to pick up the phone, like I said in those days, and call. I said, Bill, who's in charge of all the stop-and-go light sequence? And he said, the city electrician. I said, well, what does he know about traffic movement? Well, he's in charge of it. That's who you got to talk to. Well, he said, but if you want to really get involved, put your name in to be on the traffic review committee. And that's what I did. Got started on that, just saying, all right, that was one little thing, and I enjoyed it. few things that I disagreed with what they wanted to do, but it's a democracy. I was one of 7 or 5. I don't remember the exact count. And one thing led to another. People encouraged me to, if you really enjoy it, why don't you try city council itself? That's where the decisions are really made. And I did. But just to back up a bit, I know Board of Educations are important for communities, but that wasn't my passion. So a couple of people said, you're good on the city council. You ought to try this Board of Education after you get off. Because I did believe in term limits, and everybody knew I was going to be off after 3 terms. And I said, no, I just don't understand it. It's too, I understand picking up the garbage, plowing the streets, things like that. If you go into a Board of Education meeting, there's so much theory and things that I'm just not comfortable digging into.
Mm-hmm.
So, first of all, like so many of your life concerns, you got to have a passion for it. And I enjoyed city council. I thought we accomplished some things. Everybody said you could do more. You did too much. Who knows? But that's what, like I keep saying, you need a passion for it.
Are there any issues today that you feel passionate about still, even though you're not necessarily in a formal voting role or political role, that you think the community would benefit from these types of areas?
I think driving a few of these streets now, they just need to be totally rebuilt. And I can see, being on the council, they've built now most of the lead-in streets, what they like to do to get the water and sewer and everything connected. Now they got to do the main street. A good one is Wisconsin Avenue from New York to Murdoch. That's just terrible. And I noticed just the other day, all the streets leading into it, Congress or Annex or Bent, they're all paved. So I would think that should be high on their priority in the next year or 2 to do Wisconsin. But streets, fire, police and fire, of course, that you got to watch that very closely, make sure you're keeping the community protected both in safety as far as fire and crime and what have you.
You think there's anything from an economic development side of things that would play into Oshkosh well, or certain industries or certain things that people should try to grow? Or
I do get out of this area for the winter. I learned that there's better places to be in the country in the wintertime. And I've been back this year. I did some driving around out in the Southwest Industrial Park just to see, and I couldn't believe the changes out there over the last 7 to 10 years. So, you can only do so much. I mean, they're out to Claraville Road now, I'm sure, with that loading for trucks and what have you. And you can always hopefully get more, but every community is out trying to grab its piece of the pie. So how much can you give them in incentives to come here is always a good question. It'd be nice to see a little more activity on the downtown now that development on the Sawdust District?
Sawdust District,
yeah. That looks pretty promising, what I've seen in the newspapers and on TV and what have you. And hopefully in another 3 years, that'll be pretty impressive as you drive across the Main Street Bridge. And
is there anything based on some of your passions that you'd like to see?
Just me. You'd like to see development continue so that you don't see rundown areas in a community, and especially in the downtown. What they consider now, to me though, is downtown on Main Street or is it on Keller? You can have a long discussion on where the downtown is these days in cities, and we drive back and forth to Florida, and it's amazing how many communities the size of Oshkosh. You go right down the interstate, and it looks the same as Oshkosh does. The same big box stores, same fast food restaurants. And a lot of times we'll try to pull into the city and go into a Roxy, if you can find a Roxy type restaurant in some other city. And those kind of places are always, I think, give a community its own
personality.
Exactly.
Like have a little mom and pop shop that kind of sets the groundwork.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's certainly an interesting perspective to look at. What kind of solutions are there? I mean, to you mentioned there are pockets like in every town of areas that need redevelopment or areas that, have been run down or something like that. I mean, what kind of options do we have as community leaders or types of thought leaders of what could happen in these to make that to where Oshkosh doesn't have those types of errors, or very few of them.
One thing would be nice if we could find more Mrs. Kimballs around town to step up and say, I think that sounds sense. How much of a check do you need written? And, maybe Oshkosh will have a few of those. I don't want to sit here and name names, but there are some people that have come back to the community that left for a while and are spending some money in the community doing some impressive things. And, Oshkosh is a great city to grow up in. And I'm sure if somebody wanted to go through the graduates of Oshkosh high schools, there's probably some foolers out there that we just aren't aware of that who knows if they have a commitment to their hometown at some point, but that you need somebody that's got the pocketbook to make it happen.
Yeah.
And has the passion.
So you mentioned you talked a lot about having these different passions. What are some of your passions? You mentioned you golf today. What else? What are some other things that you've done over the years that you found you really have a passion for?
Well, as you're doing it, you have the passion. I mean, city council. I enjoyed that, but I'm off of it now. And, I think I'm pushing I'm pushing higher 70s. And, life changes. I mean, I love my grandchildren. That's fun now to spend time with them. And what have you. But your life's an evolving sense of different events.
It's like an adventure. It's always something different in a different season. Yeah. We got quite a few folks here today. I was wondering if anybody in the audience had some questions they wanted to ask Mr. Castle, and we could continue this kind of. Mr. Belter over here.
I'll start with a good one. Is this on? The whole thing about company transition and keeping a fifth generation company going is almost impossible. And I just have written some things down here. Oshkosh Bagash, Leach, Bemis, Musa Metal, Hoffmaster, Miles Kimball, Morgan, T&J, Marvel, all those companies were bought out. CastlePierce is still run by your family and Tom Castle and maybe his daughters. But how do you keep the family generational thing going? How do you keep them interested, and how do you decide to pull out and give it to the new generation? I guess that's a long question, but
I understand what you're saying, Tom. One of the things I think that being able to keep the family business in the family is every generation, it turned out, only had one son, other than my brother and myself, that was interested in pursuing the business. So, and then when my great-grandfather gave it to his son, my grandfather gave it to my father, and my brother and I got it from my father. We never had any other relatives that were part of the business, either stockholders, managers, any type of part of the business. So when my father died, my sisters all thought that my brother and I really got a great deal. But we said, we got a job, That's all we got was a job. We just sat back and did nothing. We'd have the company bankrupt in a year and a half. Or we'd sell it and move on. But we both enjoyed it. We had a good working relationship. So that, I think, is one of the key things in the family, that how you pass it on to each generation. If you have 4 or 5 children and you give a fifth of the business to each child, and then you get daughter-in-laws, son-in-laws, you name it, all involved, or they aren't involved but they want a dividend, then we need to plow money back into new equipment and what have you, so we can't do a dividend right now. Well, then let's sell it so we can get in part of a bigger company. Like when Morgan sold, they sold to Combustion Engineering. That was a big, successful company that had a nice dividend base. So the Shrivers, the Morgans, the Kimberleys, the families that owned it, they were happy to get their dividends and watch their stock grow. So I think, you got to look at it. What does the family want to do with the business, and how many different generations and members of that generation does the stock get split up with?
And how did you decide to pull out and give it to Tom?
Yeah. Well, no question, when he finished up with his college days, he really wanted to get involved in it. And those of you that know Tom know he's very driven. I mean, when he makes his mind up, he wants to do something, he goes at it. And he had some really serious discussions with my brother and myself saying, I wanted, like I said earlier in our conversation here, I want to grow the packaging business and not just do the printing. I mean, we do laminating, we add those Ziplocs to things. We do all kinds of value added now as part of the process. So that took investment, which he was willing to sign for and do. And we could see it was the right thing to do. So we just stood back and said, make it happen. And he made it attractive for both myself and my brother to take the stock or buy stock at the time from us. So that's how we sort of did it. Yeah, thanks. I think one of the really interesting things, I don't know how many of you have been reading here the last 4 or 5 days, I think what Herb Kohler did of a whole different company is just amazing. And then, he said, the bold look of Kohler, we got to see, what do customers want? We're not going to make toilets and faucets and everything else that we think are right if nobody's going to buy them. And between the plumbing side of his business, the generator side of the business, and the hospitality side of the business, that's just an amazing story. And how many entrepreneurs do you know that get a Wall Street Journal editorial 3 days after they die, talking about the real true American businessman and leader? Do you have a question, Paul?
Well, yes, I do. Thank you so much for being here, number one. But number two, it appears to me that what you've been very successful at is passing out what we call your corporate culture, the culture that made the business as great as it is. Is there any advice that you consider, is anything you have to perhaps pass on to us as to what you think is the best way to do this, to have children involved at an early age or something like that? Is there anything that you may give us with regards to that? Thank you.
Well, in regards to passing the culture on to the next generation?
Yes, sir.
Or
Yeah, and getting your kids involved or interested. Is there an art to that at all? Is it a parenting philosophy, a leadership philosophy?
Well, yeah, and I guess it can go either way when you have your family dinners. Now, again, how many families sit down at the dinner table like we used to do with our parents and what have you? And, do you talk about the business and do they show interest? And then if they do, how much do you bring them along? Or if they don't, do you decide, well, maybe it's time to sell it, the business or whatever? And it's, life is so different today than most of us grew up with. I just be anxious I'd love to live for another 80 years and see what things look like, but, that's not going to happen.
Welcome, Bill.
Thanks, Brett.
I like to vouch for the packaging side of the business. I, for many years, worked as a vendor. Castle was a vendor of ours. I was a large national corporation, and they just did an outstanding job and actually became like the preferred vendor of our company. It was called Sonoco Products, all over the world, and they really did a nice job in that. What he'll call that special touch, the service people that they brought on with that spirit of Mike and Tom and Bill, and they really did a nice job for us. But the question I wanted to ask was, again, thank you for that, I heard, I don't know if it's a legend or not, but I think I heard a story a little bit back to Vince Lombardi that there was something you guys used to do in the 60s with your boat. It was like a week-long tailgate, kind of. You started in Oshkosh, and how did that go? Tell us.
Well, back in the mid-'50s, a friend of my father's had an old DNR barge that he put a paddle wheel on the back of it, and he was an insurance salesman and would take people out and entertain them and what have you. So my father decided to get a friend of his that was a marine architect, and they designed one, built one, brought it to Oshkosh, and it really was a way to build relationships. I mean, that thing was out probably during the Memorial Day to Labor Day, at least 3 nights a week, entertaining customers and just having a good time. But my father we had some good customers in the Green Bay area. And the Packers and the Bears always kicked off the football season. I think it was the last Sunday in September. That shows you how football has expanded. And the locks were still very operational between here and Green Bay. So they'd take off on Thursday afternoon for a Sunday afternoon kickoff in Green Bay. But they'd stop in Appleton and what have you and have people on board and then be in Green Bay in time for the kickoff and be back in Oshkosh either Monday or Tuesday after the game. And it was just a fun way to entertain people and go to a Packer game at the same time. And they did that probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, and as things move on. But it was a cool way to entertain and, build a relationship. So,
Do you think that spirit's continued on through your corporate culture of?
Well, we definitely try. I know Tom. One of the things that Mike, like I told you, was very involved in sales. Mike said, especially as you grow a company, you've got great salespeople now. We're up to, I think, 10 salespeople. And you can't know every customer on a one-to-one, look them in the eye basis. You got to trust your salespeople. But Mike said to Tom, make sure you know your top 15 for sure. So if that salesperson walks, you know who to go in and talk to. That, because I can name, I'm not going to, but we picked up 4 or 5 good customers from good-sized printing companies that the salesperson walked, and that business walked right with that salesperson right into our company. Because the people that the other company didn't know who to go talk to once that person left. So, and I can guarantee you that Tom is paying attention to those top 15 all the time. And, he's with the salesperson when they go to make the call at least once or twice a quarter. The other times, that's why we have good salespeople we have confidence in. They can handle that, but you want to make sure, the owner knows, or if you work for a big company, the managers know who the decision makers are at your customer level.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even to the extent of if there would be hardly ever had a complaint, but if anybody complained, we didn't get it back through quality or sales. Tom or Mike were on the phone back to us, answering and telling us what they could do. There was no red tape at all. It was like right directly.
And I can remember those meetings in Mike's office when an issue was, had to be resolved. And, they would sit there and hammer out who's going to do what. And then Mike would make the call and say, here's our plan to remedy the problem. And move on, and hopefully it did. And like I say, most of the time we were able to overcome the hurdle. There were times that I'd be out in the back room too, helping sort something, or if you had a certain number that weren't right, you'd have to find them, and whatever the issue was.
Yeah. Do you think like the sales team should have that accountability over issues? Because I know there's like a debate in the business world where you got your customer service is a different skill set than your sales team. And then there's other people that say, I think your sales team should really own the entire customer experience. It sounds like that's kind of what you guys have done.
Yeah, the sales team, but the CSRs are also very important. You remember Marcia Patterson? Yeah. Well, she was a great CSR. Now she's a salesperson. I mean, you got to have that relationship, whether it's with the customer or internally with your own people, that everybody's backing everybody up when they need it.
Yeah, I want to talk
Together, I mean, it was just that you felt like the top heard the issue, and of course we work with the CSRs. They do a great job, but it just you also knew that Tom knew what was going on too.
I think something that keeps coming up too is definitely this emphasis on relationships that you and your team and your culture have been able to build over the years. And you mentioned one aspect is this being able to know them and understand them. Is there anything else you can give us on what it means to build a relationship? You had stories of entertaining customers, of having a good time with them, and really having a good experience. But what are some ways we can take that and some of the wins you've had over the years? What are some things we could do to help build relationships with customers or each other?
I think I try to give you all my thoughts. I mean, and
it's really just knowing them.
That's the most important thing is knowing them. And that's tough probably today. Well, like I said, if you're going to just email each other back and forth, how do you get to know them?
Almost like a friendship.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to, what was it that, remember United Airlines had a great old commercial. When, they're all sitting around, who's going to do what? He said, well, I'm on tonight's flight to, I think it was Boston. Well, I'm going to go talk to the customer. And it's the CEO of the company. And that's how United was, trying to fill the seats, was saying, get out there and see the customer. Don't do it over the telephone or do it over the internet today. Your email, yep. Somebody's doing the old eye contact.
Instead of just planting in a CRM and sending out your emails, but actually getting on the phone or building those relationships face to face. I think that's something that the chamber does quite well too. Is continues to have those meetings all the time. The after hours, we have consistently seeing each other face to face, and I think that's where these types of ideas come to life finally. So our shameless plug to our wonderful sponsor today, the Oshkosh Chamber, for that one. Yeah, we got Gary. You got a question?
Yeah, Bill, what was your most interesting or profound accomplishment when you were on the city council?
Well, it was amazing. I mean, I was only on there for 3 or 4 months. It was a library. When I got elected, I think it was 92, April, that's when the referendum failed, if you recall. That was always an interesting story, how the city had a referendum to do the library for, I think, around $10 million. And it failed. I'm doing this all from memory. But Ted Leahy came into Bill Free's office and said, Mrs. Kimball wants to know how much would the city council be willing to, and that shows you how things have changed, be willing to spend on a new library without a referendum. And Bill, off the top of his head, said $5.5 million. And he said, then we'll give you the other $5.5 million. And with that, we had a new library under construction. Well, I was appointed as the council member on the Library Building Commission. And some of you might remember there was a architectural firm that made a presentation for the referendum that had some nice drawings out there. And but we were going back to square one since it was a whole new plan. And so we opened it up to new architects. I can't even remember the name of the architectural firm, but he came in with what's there today, and it just blew the socks off of what the old plan was. And it came in under budget, but it was so much fun to just sit there and see the whole development and enthusiasm for the downtown area with that new library being built and then as it is today. So I think that was probably one of the single event that I really thought was a big change in the community. There were other, I think we built 3 new firehouses, which I was sort of pleased to do. And, one was on the other side of the railroad tracks, which people made a big issue of. And it was a right issue. We got it over there. Because I can also remember them saying, there's no way there'll ever be a train that'll block every street from the river to Murdoch. Well, those days are gone today. The size of some of those trains they pull through the city now, they go through much faster. But they do block from the river to Murdoch, I can tell you that, because I'm on the east side of the tracks. So, but anyways, the firehouse was one. And
Were you on the council when the senior center was
No, I took a 3-year, if you call, a hiatus. Like I said, I believed in term limits, so I did my 3 terms, and then got back involved when I got a lot of nudging from this organization to run, and I'm glad I did. The other thing too, I've also don't enthusiastically don't support at all, to be honest with you, is this election of the mayor by the city at large. I mean, I ran when that was on it was on a November presidential ballot, the referendum to change it to have the mayor elected at large by the community. I said, all that's going to do is get current council members to run for mayor. If they lose, they haven't lost anything. They can go back and be on the council, and they'll just, instead of just appointing the mayor, but whoever the council feels would be the best to lead at the time. And and I ran for that seat. I rolled the dice because my term was up as a council member. So I said, either I want to be elected mayor or I'm done with the council because I got thrown out. And there's been 4 or 5 of us. Tony Palmieri was one. I give Tony credit. He said, I'm going to run for mayor or I'm not going to be on the council. And he wasn't on the council because he lost. But most of them have run for mayor knowing if they lost, they still have a job on the council. Because I just don't like the fact that they appoint somebody then to fill that seat for a year. And, how they have these hearings or everybody comes and makes a little presentation, it still should be the people, the city's citizens that elect the 7 council members. And the mayor has really no more authority than a council member. Yeah, they cast the last vote so they can break a tie in theory, but what other the city manager form of government I think is the right form of government for a community, and the 7 council members should run the council.
Do we have a question?
Kind of a follow-up question to that. You're a unique breed. Successful businessman who decided to go get involved with politics, get involved with city government and that sort of thing. We struggle right now trying to get business leaders and there's outstanding business leaders out there to run for office, local office, school board, city council, and that sort of thing. And they all went, why do I want to put myself into that realm? What would you tell somebody, a business individual who's doing well, kind of thinking about running for office, but really maybe doesn't want to put themselves out there? What advice would you give them? What would you tell them to do in order to get them to make that decision?
Well, I mean, maybe they should try one of the boards. Go for the planning commission or go for traffic. Try something so you get a little experience sitting down in front of the public eye, and you have to sit there and listen, and you can't go in there with your mind made up. A few times I thought I had my mind made up. I probably ended up voting the way I thought I was going to vote, but there were some real interesting discussions that changed my mind. So they have to, want to do it. One thing that lucked out for me is we became empty nesters about the time I really got involved. So I had the time to do it. So that can always be a drawback if you got young kids, especially watching my son and daughter-in-law, the way they run to different schools to volleyball or swimming. It's just amazing how much time you take after school now as parents. So, they got to have the time. And the other thing that's interesting in the Oshkosh area is that a lot of the business people that we think would be good council members, unfortunately, don't live in the city limits. That's a problem in that, you can run for a school board living outside the city because the school board encompasses more than just the city. So, you can't tell them live in the city. And so it's, I'd be happy to go talk to anybody if somebody has somebody that's seriously thinking about it. I'd give them all the pros and cons of my years of being involved and how I went through getting involved. But you just got to want to do it. And because I know if you do it, it's amazing the people that'll be willing to work with you on a campaign and do the yard signs and all the stuff that you have to do. I thought, oh God, how am I going to do all this? And I couldn't believe the help I got on that. So that's never should be a hurdle. Just say, hey, if you're going to do it, and you can get the chamber and the people that support the chamber's type of ideas they'll be right there to help you. I can assure you of that. Yep.
I've always appreciated the fact that that a businessman would get involved in local politics, if you will. I've made the observation a long time ago that this country was founded by businessmen. Those businessmen who founded this country, and one of the things that built it the way it has. And it's good to see that it's still going on today. And I, number one, I certainly do appreciate it. Thank you so much.
No. Thank you, but those are almost memories now. I can't believe how long I've been out of it.
Do you think the current political climate makes it more difficult to put yourself out there on positions or policies?
No question. I think, this is the media today, is television or what have you. And
podcasts.
Podcasts,
Yep.
and it changed. It's fine. I think it's over today, but I haven't watched it. But I don't think you get the citizens that couldn't wait to get up there at Citizens Comment and talk about who knows what, and just to see themselves on local TV. And then, did council members sort of hesitate or not want to vote the way they really thought they should have voted just because, there's the whole community watching them? It changed things. In the long run, it's the right thing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with transparency. But when you asked me to do this today, I had to think about it for a little bit of time. And I enjoy visiting and trying to encourage people to get involved, but am I the most articulate person that comes on these type of things? Probably not. But, you got to have just the desire and the feeling that you can contribute somehow, and so I did.
We got a time for, I think, a couple more questions, right, El? Yeah. So
I just want to bring back some history for you. Ken Bender, 602 Oak Street.
I sure remember that, Ken. But, let me say this. Those of you that remember Ken, Miles Kimball, when they were still down on 8th, wanted 8th Avenue added to, in front of the building, added to the concrete paving program. And it was going to be a special add-on block or two. They were right there. It wasn't going to be a big deal. And, of course, they were going to be assessed their full value. Ken came up and said, if we're going to give that to them, you ought to see if they'd be willing to give us part of the corner at 9th and South Main so we can make that turn on to 9th Street going west a lot more easier for especially trucks. And see, here's where business, so I knew Mike Muyo. He had just taken over as CEO of Miles Kimball. And I called him the next day and say, Mike, if you want this, how about letting the city have, he says, tell the city engineers to come out there and show me what they want, and I'm sure we can have it. 2 days later, it was all resolved. So I always give Ken credit, because if he hadn't brought that up, who knows if that corner still would be as easy to turn today as it is.
Wasn't the Billy Club there?
No, I'm not sure what, but they had bought it by then. Yeah, Miles Kimball bought all that. Yeah, that's why there was plenty of room to do it.
So can you give us a high point and a low point of all those years in business? And I remember one low point when I was a little kid. And by the way, I thought you guys were in the right. But what was the high point of your career?
Yeah, in the city council or my
your whole career, what was the highest point and the lowest point?
As far as what you accomplished in the business. Because you were always a good corporate citizen. I mean, the list goes on and on what you guys did through those years.
Well, I mean, strictly as a father and family pride, is seeing what my son's done today with a business. I mean, that to me is just, unbelievable. And like I said, I knew when he got done with college, he had a passion for it. And he just got in there, and it's just, so that's been my high point. My own career, there were some things that I was, different customers we landed, things like that. We put on a couple editions on them. Those are all to me today, just to see the company still there, thriving, being an active community member. I know my son's involved in some of the community boards. I think Go EDC and the Oshkosh Foundation, and So I mean, a father's got to take pride in their children, and I got a daughter too that I'm very proud of. But she's in education. She's down in Indiana. She's got a different career. So, but this is about Oshkosh, and Tom's part of Oshkosh, and so's the Castle family, and I think we couldn't be prouder to be part of this community.
Thank you for everything you've done.
Yeah. Thank you.
Entrepreneur, so like his son Tom, a lot of times you hear a lot about delegation and having other experts run your business. I mean, Tom was an excellent printer. He know his business so well. I mean, we would call him, to
Yeah.
he was like the best printer. I mean, he's great. He's got great printers, but I mean, his skill and knowledge of the business was very strong. I mean, so a lot of times I look at a leader that has that knowledge of the business it's really an advantage. I know you can lead.
Yeah, looking at leaders that have technical skills, but also leadership skills.
He knew the craft very well.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Castle, this was wonderful. I think this was very insightful and helpful for us, and we're really excited to have you here. We got a small gift over here for you that you can take home.
No, thank you.
And enjoy with your wife and family, and have it. And but one more round of applause here for Mr.
Thank
Castle.
you.